Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. And on the day that President Biden visits Warsaw, we're going to focus in this series of programmes on presidential visits to Europe over the recent years, or not so recent years. And I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Adam Starzyński, our expert in all things historical, Polish and indeed presidential. Adam, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Now, these visits by American presidents to Europe at times of crisis, times of not crisis, are relatively modern. Of course, if we go back and we think particularly because President Biden was in Ukraine yesterday, a war zone, but if we think when these sort of summits first began, in a funny sort of way, it was probably the Second World War when Churchill and Roosevelt used to meet on warships in various locations.
It truly feels like a historical visit is coming, and if we look back at them, then we have a couple of them in the post-war era, as you mentioned, during the war itself, naturally, whether they were meeting in Casablanca or in Canada or in Yalta, Crimea or Tehran. There was always this exhilaration in connection with these events. People knew that they were living through a historical moment, and that depending on how a visit went, how certain discussions went, history could take a turn. And the same thing is definitely true with the visit that now we know is a combined Kiev-Warsaw visit, even though initially it was only announced that Warsaw would be the only point that the American president would visit during this trip to Europe. But it turned out that he had a surprise, and many commentators in the US are very shocked. They didn't see it coming. For the Secret Service, naturally, it was a truly testing moment. It's the first time that they've given over control, so to say, of the president over to another country which is in war. There was no American control of the airspace over Kiev yesterday. He couldn't even bring his car, the famous Beast that you usually see on screens. Instead, the Ukrainians had to provide all the necessary infrastructure and also the plans for the visit. So yesterday they released a few pictures of this by now famous train that all the Western leaders take to Kiev from Warsaw, since air travel over Ukraine is still impossible for whether it's just normal passenger traffic or even if it's state dignitaries and presidents. So it was certainly something that will go down in the history books. Naturally, due to the circumstances on the ground in Kiev, it was impossible to give one of these larger speeches out in public in front of people. Instead, he will have a chance to do it here in Warsaw today, this afternoon. And now, of course, everybody is waiting for what will be said. We are truly at what seems to be a crucial point of the war, where we had this phase for a while during the summer and early autumn when the Ukrainian forces were on the offensive in the Kharkiv region. Later they pushed them out of the Kherson region as well. And naturally, of course, back in March last year, March and April, they managed to push them out of the Kiev region, which was initially the major threat. So now, in recent weeks, we know that the Russians have been making some gains around the important city of Bakhmut. And if Ukrainian defenses would give ground there, then it's possible that they might lose some more of it in a rather quick fashion. Maybe not large enough, since Ukraine is an enormous country, which people tend to forget, which also explains why it takes 10 hours to travel by train to Kiev, which is not even in the eastern part of the country, but rather in the central part. So naturally, what's happening around Bakhmut right now is important, but we also know that there is much more Western material coming now in these coming weeks, and that they have been. The weather in Ukraine is also quite specific, with this famous Rasputitsia, the wet part of the spring season when all the snow melts and Ukraine's famous black fertile soil
becomes mud.
Oh yes, we have all seen the images from the 1940s when the Germans were trying to make their way across the same territory, and this mud can sometimes be 2-3 meters deep, and if you get stuck, then getting out of there is very difficult. So many believe that a spring offensive could be coming, but the ground will have to be fairly dry for that to happen. So we're probably talking about late April, maybe even early or mid-May. So Ukraine is hoping for these Leopard tanks, for example, from this international Leopard coalition that has been formed to arrive in the country.
Adam, as ever, the clock in the corner of the room is ticking away furiously, and so I'm going to have to ask you to pause there, but we'll pick it up next time. There we are. As usual, the clock is telling me that we have to bring this particular programme to an end, but fear not, we'll pick it up next time on Poland Daily History, and we hope you'll join us. In the meantime, thank you for watching.